So, breaking news, Chris Paul is a Warrior. I don't know where this came from, and I know that the NBA draft is today, but I will be talking about that later. But Chris Paul got traded to the Warriors for, Jordan Poole, basically. I'm going to read the trade details right now. The Warriors get Chris Paul, and the Wizards get Jordan Poole, Ryan Rollins, a first round pick, a protected first round pick in 2030, and a second round pick of 2070. No, of 2027. So basically, for Chris Paul, right? You just traded Chris Paul. If you were the Wizards right now, what you just did is that you took Bradley Beal, right? You took the figure of Bradley Beal. And what you did with that is that you turned it into a young point guard who has extreme upside and has flashiness to be the main guy on a team, into a first round pick and into a second round pick. I just want to talk about that. I think that the Wizards have really gone into this rebuild with the right mentality. What they've been looking for is that they know that trades this year are going to be different. If you guys don't know why, it's because the NBA got a new CBA, which is basically the ones who make all the rules for the NBA and the money and the trades and all that stuff. And basically teams just have to spend less money, and it's gonna cause the league, to change, because teams are going to need to be able to, make good teams, championship teams, but they can't spend $300 million anymore. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the league is trying to stop teams like the Clippers or the Warriors from getting all of this money and getting players who are this good, right? And obviously it's become a problem for the NBA, and for the league, the teams are spending this much money over the salary cap. Now, what I do want to talk about is that I think that they just did this because they want to release Chris Paul and make money for Draymond. I do believe that they can assign him to a more team-friendly deal, but I don't think that they are going to keep him in his entirety. And if they are, then, welcome Chris Paul. I think Chris Paul is obviously phenomenal. He's a legend, and him with Curry sounds very interesting. I think Chris Paul might come off the bench because they're both two small point guards who are both ball dominant. Or maybe Chris Paul will just start and distribute, and Steph Curry will move to shooting guard, which will be interesting. But Chris Paul, in the end, he got traded to the Warriors. This is unexpected. The Warriors in this offseason have been extremely aggressive. They have been in every trade talk, and they've been consistently, getting rumors and buzz about what are the Warriors going to do because they have all this money. And they lost to the Lakers this year, right? So it's basically become now like, well, what are the Warriors going to do with all this players, with all this money, and how are they going to make it work? It's obvious that they're going for championships. They don't want to lose, and that shows for the fact that they traded Jordan Poole for Chris Paul. One point guard who chokes for another one, but one's a champion. So I don't know how that works out. And in my opinion, I just want to say that I don't like this move. And I'm saying this purely because even though I do think that the Warriors should have traded Jordan Poole, and I do think that he was way too expensive, right, for what he did in the playoffs and stuff. Chris Paul is retiring probably next year. So you just traded Jordan Poole, and you just spent a lot of picks, right? Like a first round pick and a second round pick just so that you can get rid of this kid who's really pretty bad, honestly. Let's face it, Jordan Poole is not the same player he was, and he's not close to that because now he's got such a heightened role and he's not made for that. But you take this kid, which you have to trade, and then you trade him, but then you end up giving more to the other team when you're trading for a player who's about to retire, is expensive, and is probably going to cost your team a lot of stress due to the way that he plays basketball and the way that he runs himself. In my opinion, this was not a good move for the Warriors because now they get this old point guard who chokes in the playoffs and Chris Paul, right? They spent a first round pick and a second round pick. Jordan Poole, even though he was a choker and they needed to trade him, he was at least young and at least had legs on him so he could play an entire game. And in my opinion, I just believe that the Warriors just had nothing to do this offseason and they needed to get rid of Jordan Poole. So the easiest thing to do was to just trade for a veteran like Chris Paul. Because it's going to be very hard for people to say that it was a bad trade just because it's Chris Paul to the Warriors. I want to see how they pair Chris Paul and Stephen Curry together. And honestly, if this is just all to buy out Chris Paul and then, release him from the Warriors, then it was a smart move. But I don't think that you had to waste a first round pick to do that. So moving on to the Wizards side, though, I think you played this perfectly. I think if you're a Wizards fan right now, then you're extremely happy, right? Like, the Wizards needed somebody. They had been left without player, without someone to be drawn to. Now, let's face it, the Wizards were not going to be the Thunder. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's that the Thunder got Chris Paul one year, and their entire team was really bad. And what ended up happening was that Chris Paul carried them to the playoffs. And even though that sounds like a great story, let's face it, that's not going to happen. Because Chris Paul's not that player anymore. Right? Like, if you got Chris Paul this year, then he would have just been an old point guard just living out his last days. So, in my opinion, right, it was good that the Wizards traded it. And also, I like who they traded it for. Jordan Poole is a flashy point guard who makes shots. He makes ridiculous jumpers, and he wants always to, he has that mentality of, I'm going to score, right? And I believe that's very good, especially when you're on a team which doesn't have, anyone to score. In my opinion, Jordan Poole might actually come into his own this year. I want to know how he feels right now, especially since Draymond Green was the one who punched him, and now Jordan Poole is getting traded, because that shows a lot about what being good at basketball can provide for you. And in my opinion, I do believe that this trade for the Wizards was phenomenal. They got a pick, which is something that they had been struggling with, right? As they hadn't gotten many picks through the trading of their superstars, because Bradley Beal was a tough situation, right? And Kristaps, they decided to go with the route of receiving more players, but even though they should have gotten a pick. And in my opinion, now they got a first round pick. They got a franchise player, or at least a player who will make your franchise look good and give you some minutes to commemorate. And now you get off of Chris Paul, which was a point guard which you never wanted to use, and who you were just had in your team just to trade him. So I like this for the Wizards. I don't like this for the Warriors. And in my opinion, let's see what happens and let's see how this shapes the league. Also, I will be posting a video about the draft tomorrow, but I didn't want to do it today because I want to see recaps of the draft. Yeah, so I see what happens.